Otherwise, we'll crack on. So over the page, please. Okay, so the agenda for today is that we'll talk about the open application process, what type of grants are available. We know that there's a lot of money going out and there's a fair bit of confusion about what to apply for, what you're eligible for. I will do a very brief walkthrough of the application process itself in Smarty Grants, but for most of the meeting, we'll want to just really hear from you, your questions about the grant, and we'll capture those questions and answers and populate a frequently asked questions, and that will be available on the DCJ internet page with all the other resource materials about the support fund. So that's for today. Mark, you've got your hand up. No longer?
There was an accident, sorry.
So if we can keep questions to the end, that would be great, and I'll talk through the process of how we're going to do that when we get to questions. So over the page, please, Mark. Okay, so the Social Sector Support Fund, it's a bit of a mouthful. We just refer to as the Support Fund. Open Applications Grant has started last week, and thanks everybody to coming into this information session. The grant is to support organisations in the social, health, disability and animal welfare sectors who are charities and not-for-profits. We realise that organisations have done it tough during COVID and particularly the lockdown as well, that revenue has decreased and demand for the services that you provide have also increased as well. So that's why government has put out the additional grant funds to go out to the charities and not-for-profit sector, is about to make sure that the sector is able to remain viable and meet those increased community needs during this time. So that's why we have this grant program. It's there to support you to do what you're currently doing, and recognising that there are a lot of pressures happening at the moment from operating your organisations. So that's why the grant is there. Can we go over the page? In terms of the practicalities of it, it is an unusual grant program. It's unlike other programs where you normally would submit a proposal. There's a project. There's budgets. There's a rationale for why you need the money. In this program, it's based on your eligibility, whether you qualify for a payment or a grant payment or not. And there'll be we'll walk through in a little bit time what those eligibility criteria are. But what we're wanting to do is provide the grant to ensure that you can continue doing what you're doing now. We're not asking you to do anything completely different. We're not asking you to reinvent yourselves. It's about making sure that you can continue supporting your local communities and your clients during this period as we get out of lockdown, and also for different parts of the state, there are also hotspot areas as a result of COVID as well. So it's helping you to gradually work through how do you reopen, re-engage, and deliver services to your clients. It could be used for payments directly to support clients to do things, but we expect most of it is to cover your operational expenses as well. You can also claim up to 50% of the grant on expenses that you've already incurred when lockdown in the Greater Sydney area happened on the 26th of June. So it doesn't mean that you need to spend the money on new things right now, but you can claim for expenditure during the lockdown period where you had to use dip into your reserve funds or other sources of income to make sure that you can keep your doors open and keep on delivering services to your community. But what we want to be clear on is that we don't want the grant to be used for you to significantly change what you're doing. So if you're a organisation supporting people in homelessness, we're not expecting you to use this grant to then branch out to start supporting people with a disability. we're not expecting that you'll be changing drastically what you do. The grant is there to help you continue with what you're currently providing a service to. It's also not intended for you to go off and make major purchases, property, making improvements to property, major piece, minor capital. So going off and buying vehicles, particularly if there is then an ongoing cost that will also be incurred. This is a one-off grant. We want to be clear that there shouldn't be any ongoing liability to DCJ to keep funding you to keep going. It is a one-off payment to organisations to deliver services, and it's not also to be used for significant organisation capability development. There was another grant that came out last year, the Social Sector Transformation Fund, which was all about capability development, and we still have some support available from that transformation fund, which we can also distribute to this group afterwards as well. So it's really about your short, medium term activities, what you can do to just keep going and keep supporting your community and your clients. Can we go over the next page, please? We know that there's a lot of different grants out there. We have been trying to promote as well that there is another way that charities and not-for-profits can access additional funding, and that's the JobSaver for not-for-profits. That closes on the 15th of November, and it's run by Service New South Wales. There in the website for the support fund, there's various links to the JobSaver for not-for-profits, and also in our guidelines and in the application form itself on Tomato Grants. If you're likely to be eligible for that, that's where your revenue reduction is more than 15%. You'll be likely to be eligible for the JobSaver not-for-profit, and that's a more generous program. They have $150 million in available funds for charities and not-for-profits to access. Closing date is the 5th of November, so it's very short, and you actually also need to provide financial statements by your accountant. So it is a bit tricky to apply, but we want to make sure that organisations are aware of that. Within the Social Sector Support Fund, it's a $50 million fund, and there's various buckets of money coming out of that fund. Organisations that are eligible for the workforce contingency payment, they've already been contacted, and that's for organisations that are funded by DCJ to deliver permanency support program services, so out-of-home care, specialist homelessness services, and a few other sort of direct face-to-face services during lockdown, where there is a high likelihood that staff have had to be stood down or having to isolate because of COVID. We've given a ability for organisations to claim staffing expenses that are out of the ordinary for them to claim those expenses. So there's an established process for eligible organisations, and they've been identified that they can access those funds. It's not widely available to everybody, though. We also have had a select tender process for DCJ organisations, funded organisations, and that's also closed. Part of the fund, $10 million, has gone to existing organisations. We wanted to put funding out very, very quickly to organisations delivering services to vulnerable clients that DCJ supports, so that they can meet the demand during lockdown in particular. But the majority of the funds, or I shouldn't say the majority, but the vast bulk of the support fund is going out through open applications, and that's to all organisations, whether it's DCJ funded or not, and any organisation that's eligible can apply, and that closes on the 28th of November. There's also a general sector support that we'll be providing. So there'll be a free advisory service. More information about that will go out, where organisations can ring up and get some help, particularly around how to operate in a COVID-safe way. There's various policies and health orders that you need to comply with. So we'll be providing a free advice, or NGOs will be given access to free advice to get support on how to actually operate. Then there's also other COVID-related grants programs, so the Partnership Grant and the Regional Partnership Grant, and as I said before, the Social Sector Transformation Fund. They've all closed, but they have also been different ways that government has gone over the last 6 months or so in putting out extra support to the sector in not-for-profits to support through the COVID responses. Okay, so I encourage people to look at JobSaver, and obviously you've been interested in looking at the support fund open applications. That's why you're here today. Okay, can we go to the next slide?
Stephen, just before you move on, there's some questions in the chat you might like to address.
Thank you for that, Mark. Quite a lot of questions. Just going through that. Okay, JobSaver applications are already closed. That's for the main JobSaver program for private businesses as well, and that's where they've got a 30% revenue reduction mark. It's very confusing, I have to admit, when you go onto that website in Service New South Wales. The main JobSaver program has closed, but the JobSaver for not-for-profits is still open, and that will close on the 15th. It's not easy, but if you go onto the website, you'll have to navigate down, and you can call a business concierge number, and they can also walk you through it. It's a bit tricky, but it is what it is, I'm afraid. Copies of the slide will be available. We'll have to work out how to send it out, or we put it on our website. Any remaining SSTF funding available? So the Social Sector Transformation Fund has been fully spent. That was $50 million. Most of it was spent in the last financial year. There was a residual amount of $5 million that's also gone out early this financial year. So can government agencies like health apply for funding? No, it's only for charities and not for profits, and you need to be basically registered with the ACNC or ORIC. Does it apply for community housing providers? Yes, as long as you're a not-for-profit and you're registered with ACNC or ORIC. If organisation received JobSaver for retail, for our retail department, can we still apply for our service delivery branch? No, it's if you've got an organisation and you've got different parts of your organisation getting money from the JobSaver program, then as a whole entity, we'll be judging or assessing your application based on your whole entity, not the subsidiary or different branches.
Stephen, sorry, just one point there. The question says they've received. It depends whether they're currently receiving it.
Yeah. So if you've got the money, if you're getting JobSaver already for your business arm, you are ineligible as an entire organisation for the support fund. There's a question around, does gradual return to service within SSF include wages? Yes, it is to cover your operations. You mentioned SSTF has further funds that will be distributed after open grants. No, the transformation fund, that's the SSTF, has been fully expended. The only other fund that we've got is the support fund. As I said, there's a general helpline or general supports available for the sector support. The only it's a broad grant program that is still open, is the open application process, which is how you've come to this briefing. There's a small group of organisations that's eligible for the workforce contingency, and they've been contacted directly if they're eligible for that. So the open application process is the main grant that's still available. Now there's a few more questions, so I might hold off there because we'll do a walkthrough of the Smarty Grants process in a moment, and I'll come back to the questions. So I think I'm throwing over to Dong Chai.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. Hi, everyone. So we're just going to walk through the Smarty Grants application form for the Social Sector Support Fund open applications. So I've done just a mock application in Smarty Grants just to show from the applicant's perspective on what that looks like for you, yeah? So on the first page is just a brief run through of key messages and general instructions on how to apply through this application form. So just click through the next page. So the first page is just general organization information. So for instance, your ABN, your org name, address, bank account details, and your contact name, or the best contact person for the person that will be managing this grant for your organization. Yeah. Now the next page is about eligibility criteria. The first question just asks you to select whether you're ACNC registered as a charity or not-for-profit, whether you're ORIC registered, which is the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations, or whether you're registered under both. And then it just asks you to select the relevant sector of your services. So we're just asking you to select the one that best fits the main service type for your organization, yeah? If you find that you provide a social service, but it doesn't necessarily fit into any one of these, just select social services here, yeah? Then it asks you whether you're an ACCO, which is an Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation, and just click yes or no. And also whether your organisation primarily delivers services in regional New South Wales. Now, for the purposes of this grant, when we say regional New South Wales, we're referring to areas generally outside of Greater Sydney, those of which will be considered to be regional New South Wales. And just bear in mind, these two questions, the first one about ACCO and the second one about regional New South Wales, do not affect your eligibility for the grant. All right, so the next question asks you to put in your funding amount that you're requesting. So just select the relevant sort of bracket that it falls under. And it's importantly to note that this is indicative only. So the final grant amount that we would award you will be determined by us to be calculated based on the information you provide as well. Yeah. All right, so then we go into the information you provide to us. So we're asking for your revenue for the periods of July to September 2021, and also for the periods of April to June 2021. So we're asking for your revenue for those periods, your operating expenses for those periods, and if you just put that into these fields here, the percentage change in the revenue and operating expenses is automatically calculated. Then we're asking you to just attach your income and expenditure statements for the above financial periods. So those periods, July to September 2021 and April to June 2021. And then lastly, we're asking you to provide a percentage change in demand for that period between July to September 2021 and April to June 2021. So in this field, just put in the percentage figure for your change in demand. If it's a positive change in demand, it would just be a number there. If it's a negative, just put a negative in front of that number, yeah? And then just as evidence, or just as a short explanatory note about how your demand has changed, just up to 100 words in this box here. So as just an example, we're looking for things like the number of people you've had to turn away, the number of calls you've received, or the number of people you have on a waiting list, perhaps. Just put those in there, and that would help to explain this percentage change in demand. Yeah. All right, so finally we have the reporting agreement, which is basically that at the end of your at the end of the period of the grant, you'll just submit a very simple report through this multi-grants platform as well. And this brief report will cover how much of the grant has been expended and whether your organization has been able to meet the demand for services. Importantly to note, there are no additional reporting requirements for this grant. So just tick agree. All right, so the last page is just about your declaration. So we need the 2 authorized signatories that will be signing off on not just this declaration, but also the ones that you'll be nominating to sign your funding deed, which will be issued to successful eligible providers. Yeah. So that's the one for A and that's one for B. And just important to note that both authorized signatories need to agree to these statements here. Yep. And then just click yes to agree the above declaration, and then click next page. So the last page is just an opportunity to review your submission. If everything looks okay, just go down and click submit. And that's it. And once you submit your application, you will receive a confirmation of your submission and also a PDF of your application through your email. That's it. Yep.
Thank you for that, Don Chai. It's a relatively straightforward process. If you've got any issues or problems with the application form, you can email the team. I can't remember the email address off the top of my head, but we can put it hopefully on the chat, and we send. Oh, there we go. It's the social. We'll send you the actual name of the email, not just the link as well. So it's as I said earlier, you don't need to put in a justification of what you're going to use the money for. It's to assess your eligibility. And to give us information then to work out how much funding that we can work out to calculate the actual grant amount. Now, if you've got questions about the application process, pop it in the chat, and I'll go back to the chat now and work through the questions that have been asked. We have a question about New South Wales primary public school parents and citizens. Not-for-profit charity, are we eligible? So you're not-for-profit charity, which you would be eligible, but because you're operating the education space, you're not eligible because you're not part of the sectors that the support fund is targeting, which is the social support, health, disability, and animal welfare. So you're not eligible because you're not part of the sector that we are targeting the support fund to. Can we apply if we did receive JobSaver, but this ceased on the 11th of October? Can we still apply? Yes, because it's a point in time. So if you've had JobSaver in the past, but you're no longer receiving it, then you can apply for the support fund. Can an NFP org that does not have AAC, NC, or ORIC registration apply? You can, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you're a not-for-profit or a charity, and in most cases, ACNC is the easiest way to demonstrate that. Our family support worker is yes. So if you're needing to pay staff additional, if you need to expand your service delivery, and that means providing more shifts to your staff, and that's what this fund is about. It's being able to give you the resources to meet the increased demand for services. There's a So the percentage drop in revenue and quarter comparisons. We just want a simple extract from your finance systems, income and expenditure statement. Most of you have got some sort of, hopefully, MYOB type accounting system. So a simple extract from that showing your income and expenditure for those 2 periods is all we need. It doesn't need to be audited. You don't need an accountant to review it. We just need evidence to show that your revenue has declined and your expenses have increased. You don't need to look at averaging it across the year or anything complicated. We might want to make it as simple as you can. So can organisations use this to pay for staff redundancies that occurred since June 2021? I think we need to get back to you on that one. It's a question I haven't thought of before, so we'll take that on notice around using the grant for staff redundancies. There is some tricky accounting issues with that, but I need to just check on that. What about Central Coast? Is that regional in this context? Yes. We had a bit of a debate internally. How do we define regional? I'm thinking it's the generally accepted, the Greater Sydney area. During the lockdown definition, it was also expanded down to the Illawarra as well and to Central Coast, but I think we just confine it to what we think is Sydney as the metropolitan area. Funding amount, how do we determine this so we are not excluded? The funding, how should I phrase this? Whether you're eligible or not for the grant is independent of how much you ask for. So we will be assessing your eligibility first. Once you're in, you'll get funding. What we want to know is how much funding is actually going to make a difference to your organisations and for you to nominate an amount, because we want to make sure that the funding we give you is going to meet your needs. And as you may have seen in the eligibility, in the guidelines, we also need to be prepared if there's more people applying for funding than there is, or if there's less organisations applying for funding, we'll need to work out how to distribute the grant. So if we've got a baseline to work from, then we can work out if we give you more or we have to trim some off. We also need to work out for those organisations, particularly Aboriginal ones and more regional remote ones, that we may prioritise them above the ones in the metropolitan areas. So it won't, so there's no wrong answer, is the short way of saying in indicating a grant funding amount. There's no wrong answer. So pick what will be meaningful for you to be able to spend up until end of March, I think is what we've said as the end date. If you have the
April, Stephen.
Thank you. So if end of April, what you can consider is spend it on. If you're getting close to April and you haven't spent the money, come talk to us. We can extend that. If there's not a negative change in income, but there's been a very clear increase in demand, are we eligible? Yes. So we know through the process that we started in September when we asked for registration information. So we wanted to see what's going on in the sector. We did see some organisations where revenue has stabilised, but there's been a huge increase in demand for services. A lot of not-for-profit and charities have got just government funding, and government funding generally is stable, particularly for those who are funded by DCJ on a year-to-year basis. Revenue isn't the issue, it's just the demand for your services have increased quite a bit. So you're eligible for the grant because of the demand element. So does income and expenditure statements need to be audited or by an accountant? No, just print it off from your systems. Can you do an Excel spreadsheet or similar? Yes. We just need to see some evidence to back up the percentage change, or to back up what you've put in as the income and for those 2 periods. More questions about income and expenditure statements. Okay, so there's a question about if you've got a payment that covers a whole year, that comes into that quarter that you're reporting against, do you just report the whole amount, or do you just report the quarter? That's a really good question. Let us work that through and get back to you, but I'm going to hazard a guess that you only do the quarter, but we need to think that through. That's a very good question. I know, should have predicted that, because DCJ funds every quarter, and you would have a lump of money at the beginning of that quarter. But it's typically for DCJ, we pay a quarter in advance, and it's for that quarter. We don't normally pay for the whole year in advance. So we just need to unpack that a little bit. So there's a question about so quite a complicated question about, from a CHP, accumulated backlog of services, can they use the money for that? So revenue and expenses remain fairly constant during lockdown. Can we receive funds to increase short-term resourcing to clear our extensive property service backlog of work? So I'm assuming there's a backlog of work because of is it increased demand, or is it just the normal backlog of work? If it's because there's increased demand for services, yes, but if it's just the normal backlog that you always have, I need to have a think through that, but it doesn't look like it meets our eligibility criteria. The purpose of the support fund is to support organisations with revenue drop, but also where you've had increased demand for services. It's not really there to cover your normal backlog of work, particularly if your revenue hasn't dropped. Okay, so we've submitted an expression of interest. Does it have any relevance to this application process? No. So we asked organisations to express their interest so that we can keep in contact with you once we actually have the grant application process open. And we also asked for information to help us with planning and working out how do we design the application, or the open grant application process. So that was very useful in trying to pitch this application, or pitch this particular stream of the support fund. So you do need to apply again, but your answers from the previous Smarter Grants process won't be taken into account at all. So, and we know that your circumstances may have changed, and you may have got a bit more information about what's going on, so you able to provide more clearer information. What activities can be funded? Can you clarify that organisations can use funds to continue to support COVID impacted households, and individuals, including food and emergency relief, even if that type of emergency work isn't part of their service offering? Yes, you can continue to support your community and clients in a general sense, filling in the gaps for service delivery. It's about making sure that organisations can continue to deliver supports in what you're currently funded to do in your normal BAU. But if you're also providing additional support as a result of COVID, in doing sort of the ancillary or wraparound supports for that person, if they've got COVID or isolating, that's perfectly fine for you to use the fund for as well. We want to allow organisations to be able to use this fund flexibly. We're not going to ask you for to report on what you've done in counting in lots of detail and bound to provide lots of specific information about what you've used the funds for. We want to know that you've spent the funds appropriately and that you've been able to meet the increased demand for services. It's up to you how you use that, as long as it's reasonably consistent with what your organisation's purpose is for. As I said earlier, we don't expect you to be chasing a completely different client group that you have now, or using this as seed funding to expand your operations in another geographic area or going into a different sector entirely. But if you're generally supporting your clients and communities and they've got COVID and you're providing supports, then yes, use this fund for that. So for the support fund select tender, yes, we've closed that and successful organisations have been notified and they've been getting their funding deeds signed and returned, and we've started making payments. Okay, so there's a similar question before around suspending of services, and now that you've got a backlog of result, including increased need for services, yes, this can be used for that. So if you've had during lockdown, basically close your operations, and there's a whole bunch of people that you weren't able to support because you've had to close because you had no income or there were issues with being able to operate, and now you've got a backlog of people from that's increasing demand, you can use the funds for that. So funds had to be spent by 30th of April. Yes, it is by 30th of April. So this is about helping organisations deal through the lockdown, the cost pressures that you've had, but also as we get out of lockdown and start opening up, there's different demands and needs as well. And with another grant program that we're running, there was a fair bit of information came out that said, particularly the 12 LGAs, that the support for people with COVID, once they've recovered, they started to dry up, and there was actually a continuing need to support people with COVID, even though the acute health bit has settled down. There's still an ongoing need to support people. So this is what the support fund is there to do as well, is to work out how can you start working with your client groups to transition out of the lockdown, and what are the different types of supports and needs are out there as we get out of lockdown, and as we get into more COVID usual world. So it is, as I said, keep on saying, we expect organisations to be able to use these funds flexibly to meet whatever the emerging needs are, and it's a bit difficult to predict what they are at the moment. Is Wollongong considered regional? Yes, for the purpose of this. Okay, is revenue definition for the support fund same with the turnover definition on JobSaver? We need to get back to you on that very specific question about the definition used in JobSaver, on which is based on the business activity statement that is used for GST calculations. We'll need to get back to you on that one. When do funds need to be spent by? End of April, but as I said, that can be extended, but we need you to talk to us beforehand. The range of grant applied for, reduction in income. The range of grant, okay, so the amount of money that you are requesting, is it based on the reduction in income or profit? Yes, but you can also use that to predict if there's an increased demand. So it can be used to replace some of your income reduction in revenue, but you can also factor in that, yes, if the demand will stay the same, this is what I need. Or if you're also seeing that there's an increased demand, you can also factor that into the amount that you are claiming for a grant. So it's to replace the revenue loss and also to meet increased demand. So there's a question about being a not-for-profit or a charity, but not registered with ACNC. Incorporation number with fair trading, will this mean we are eligible? I'll take a guess at this stage and say yes, but we'll clarify that in an FAQ about organisations that are not registered with ACNC or ORIC. How do you establish or prove that you're a not-for-profit? Okay, so someone wanted to reiterate, if they had JobSaver in September and they no longer have JobSaver, can you still apply for this fund? Yes, you can. Okay, question around revenue, expenses and revenue both increased in the March 21 quarter, but expenses were 90% revenue only by 69%. Okay, we'll need to. I'm not very good at doing maths in my head on the spot. There's a very particular question about revenue increases, so we'll answer that specifically offline. Or if someone in the team who's good at maths, can you reply to that question that was submitted at 12:31 p.m. Can we use the funds for additional clinical supervision costs incurred? And whilst they were in lockdown and coming with increased demand for vaccination issues, yes, you can. Okay, so there's a question here that said that organisation ran a health promotion during lockdown. It didn't quite reach the audience. Can you apply for funding to redo this activity? Yes. This is we are not going. The fund is there to support what you are normally doing. So we are not asking for project proposals about what you're going to spend the money on. That's not in the form at all. So if you're, part of your organisation is promoting health messages, then if you want to rerun that again with using this fund, then you can do it. Our revenue declined and our operating expenses decreased, but demand grew. Would we qualify? Yes. So the element here is the demand. So if your revenue dropped, and which meant that you weren't able to spend the money because you didn't have the money. So your operating expenses dropped, but you had a huge increase in demand as well. Then that's what we want to see and have a description in your application form to actually explain how you counter that demand increase. Does funding include the GST component? No, so make everything GST exclusive. How do we demonstrate the increase in demand? That is a really tricky thing, and that's where we are asking you to describe in 100 words, as Dong Chai showed you in the walkthrough of the Smarter Grants application form. It's up to you. If you've got a waiting list, that's really easy and a way of showing demand. So your waiting list normally is 50 people, but during lockdown it peaked at 100, 200. You've got a backlog of people that you would normally service and you can't. The number of emails and phone calls requesting support has increased. As long as you can explain where you've said 20% increase in demand with some narrative of what that is, with some examples, then that's what we need. It is a difficult way to count it, I know, and that's why we gave you an option to describe in 100 words or less what that is. Keep it brief. Our income and operating costs decreased due to lockdown greater than 15%. For both, however, demand also increased. Do we still qualify? you would, if your revenue decreased by 15% or more, so if your revenue dropped by 20%, for example, you should have gone to job support, because they will then work out a payment that will be backdated to 26th of June. And it's actually probably more generous than what we will be able to pay out in the support fund. Noting though that there's only a few days left to apply for the JobSaver not-for-profit. So we encourage organisations to go down that route as much as possible, because it is going to be probably more generous. But if you don't make it, if you don't get a payment from JobSaver, even though you're eligible for it, we can still make you eligible, or you will still be eligible for the support fund, because what we'll be doing when we assess applications is check with Service New South Wales and to see who are they making a payment to under the job support program, and that will disqualify you from the support fund. So we encourage you to go there first and get through in that program, because that's probably going to be more money. There's quite a few hoops to jump through in that process though. If we receive funding that is not JobSaver from DCJ, can we apply for more funding? DCJ doesn't pay out JobSaver, so New South Wales does, and that's the main eligibility criteria. So if you've got other funding from DCJ through normal recurrent or sort of funded services, or one-off grants that we've paid out through as a result of COVID, you can still apply, but you still need to meet those eligibility rules around revenue and demand. Oh, if we had an increased revenue, but the grant agreement states we can only spend the funding on non-frontline services, but the increase in demand is for frontline services, are we eligible? I need to unpack that a bit more and understand that. I don't quite get it, so we'll respond to that directly after this. We've got 9 more minutes, so I'll just keep going through this. As I said before, we will be looking at all of these questions and putting out an FAQ. So we'll be summarising some of these questions up. So because there are a couple of repeated questions or variations on a theme that will be available online, and we can, I think, team, we have everybody's email address, or we can put things onto this channel afterwards that everybody can access. Is that right?
We can put it up on the website as well, Stephen.
Okay. There's a question about retrospectivity. Yes, so the backdating on to the 26th of June to claim up to 50% to reimburse from the grant fund, that applies to wherever you are, whether you're in the Greater Sydney area or where you're regional. It's to acknowledge that really the Delta outbreak really kicked off in June, and it had quite a big impact on organisations, particularly in the Greater Sydney area, but it was also impact statewide as well. So you can claim retrospective reimbursement on costs regardless of where you are. It's not just in the Greater Sydney area. Okay, so there's a question here about an organisation that gets funding on an annual or biannual basis. So it will be quite lumpy the way that they will be reporting their revenue if we were only to look at a quarter at a time. So we'll have to think through how you present that and get back to people on that and provide an answer in an FAQ, because it looks like it's going to be a common occurrence. Our thinking was looking at organisations that had regular payments or revenue coming through, but looks like there's a couple of organisations out there that have big lots of money coming in throughout the year, but there'll be periods of time where there is no revenue that comes in. Is there estimated date for successful grants to be announced and awarded? We're hoping to be able to announce and get this out by early mid-December. It is pretty close to Christmas, I know, but the sooner we can get this out and organisations sign their deeds, we'll make payments as soon as we can before Christmas. But I expect this will go into the January period as well. But we'll do as our best, because it closes on the 28th of November. We'll have to assess and go through that process and get the approvals to offer the grant in early December. Would Tier 1 community housing be eligible for this grant? I need to understand what Tier 1 community housing is first, but as I keep on saying, the general eligibility criteria is about whether you're a not-for-profit or charity, if you're in the sectors that we've named, and around the revenue and demand changes. If part of our organisation is funded by Department of Human Services and others from DCJ, can we use the fund for the whole organisation? Yes. So this funding, this grant that we're providing isn't just for your services that you're funded for under DCJ. It's for your whole organisation. It's not tied to a particular grant or a particular contract that you may have with DCJ. If providing food rescue, can we use the funds to purchase food? Yes, if that's part of what you're normally doing in supporting your community and your clients, you can use the funds for that. Can we use to purchase things like air purifiers? We said earlier on, it's not to be used for minor capital, and capital generally from an accounting point of view is defined as 5,000 or more. So small expenditure can be used for that, but we don't intend the grant to be used to buy a whole bunch of vehicles, to buy a whole bunch of equipment. But for incidental expenses, they can be used for that. But we want it to really target it on client service provision as much as possible. Okay, so the email for further questions, team members responded. So I'll read out as well for those who are following on the chat. So if you've got any question about this application or this grant, you can email Social Sector Support Fund at facs.nsw.gov.au. If you Google Social Sector Support Fund, the DCJ website should pop up pretty quickly. In all our communications, the email address is there as well. Okay, can we apply for 50% to retrospectively reimburse expenses after 26th of June, but what date does this end? Up until the point you apply. So if you've got a grant, for example, $50,000, and we offered that to you mid-December, you can use $25,000 to expenses that you've incurred right up until that point. So from 26th December to early December, you've probably got all sorts of other expenses, but you can use up to 25% of the $50,000 we offer you for reimbursements. How do we extract from our income statement that needs to attach this? Okay, so there's another question about getting money in a lump sum and doesn't evenly match expenditure across a quarter. So we'll provide some information how we do that. There's a very long and complicated question about income and expenditure decrease, I might have to just take that offline and respond, or get the team to respond to that particular question from Angela outside of this. Yes, we'll send out an email when the FAQs are ready, so you can see them. Yes, when you're doing your income and expenditure, it's for your whole business entity. So basically, the organisation that has the same ABN number. It can be quite complicated now for the larger organisations where you might have different business entities under the one corporate entity. You might have different ABN numbers, but we're wanting to look at your whole corporate entity, not your various business arms or trading arms. And I would say most organisations that are that big are probably should have gone to the JobSaver program. Can we use the funds to purchase car for collecting food, rescue, or support for clients? I'm going to say no, because it's quite a significant purchase for using these funds for. But if you and there's also a recurrent cost with that as well. So if you can find other sources of funds to purchase a car, and the grant then is to keep your service going, then that's fine. But we don't expect the grant to be used to purchase assets like cars. So there's another person asking about, is it for a specific business stream or is it for the whole organisation? It is for the whole organisation. It's not just for a particular business stream. That we've finished all the questions and it's 1 o'clock on the dot. How's that for timing? Thank you everybody for participating today. This is recorded, so it will be available for people who can't make it, and we'll be collating all the questions. I'm doing an FAQ. There were a few questions there that I didn't want to try and attempt to answer because they had lots of numbers, and answering questions with lots of numbers on the spot isn't something that I really want to do. So we'll with very specific questions, we'll try and contact you with answers to that. So thank you everybody for participating today, and hope you can confidently fill in the application form online as a